Hello, and welcome to today's video where I will be showing you how to get the EOS, the Epic Online Services, to function with device ID without having to create it from scratch. Now, an important thing to note, the first thing you got to know is you're going to need a source build of the engine. I know, a little bit annoying, but if you get that, then what this will allow you to do is to be able to use Epic Online Services with device IDs, which will allow you to have multiplayer without people having to create an account. And it should be cross-platform. I could be incorrect. What I'm going to be showing today is like something I've, gone and put together for one of my projects. This isn't the project, but I may not have done it perfectly. There might be some improvements or changes that need to be done. But at the very least, I think it's important to open up the topic and show what I have come to learn. So, yeah, let's get into this. Now, the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to open up this. I'm going to hit play on this project. It's going to prepare 12 shaders, which is going to take a while. Yes, of course. There we go. Now the shaders have been prepared. We have a pretty basic game, and actually showing off how to get the whole infrastructure flowing and running is not something that's going to be in the scope of this video. I'm going to show you on a technical level how to get the things functioning, which will basically just be like your online subsystem portion of the online multiplayer, not the actual session finding and lobbies and stuff like that. That is not within the scope of this video. So yeah, we got a pretty basic character, pretty basic third-person template, and we're going to use this to create what we need to. So allow me to get into that. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to want to go up to this root directory of all. I'm going to go to the C++ classes. It's very important that it's C++. This is a C++ thing. It is going to be necessary. You've got to use the source code, so C++ is a requirement. But, some pretty basic implementation I have here is going to be hopefully enough. It's a start. But you might find that iteration is going to be required. Iteration might be what you need because maybe there's something that the scope of my project hasn't accounted for. And so you might need to change some things, iterate things, and so you might need to become a bit familiar with C++. But now we're in the C++ classes root directory. Going to double click on this, and we have a basic my project character and my project 6 game mode. I didn't name this at all, so yeah. Alright, I'm going to create a new C++ class, and I'm going to base it off of the player controller. Coolio. Now, if I put this in public and go like... You know what? Let's just follow the rest of the convention that the project is going for. My project 6 player controller. Cool. I'm probably not going to worry too much about the file structure because I think I'm going to only be creating 2 classes today. Okay, I'm going to create this class now. So, create the player controller. That's going to take some time to compile. 43%. Oh, most amazing number. It's just a good place to just freeze and not do much, Alright. So here, what we have here is what we have here, right? And that's the important part to remember, is that we've got the live coding up now, so that means that it's gone, and it's just trying to do the final little bits of compilation. And once this is finished, then we get to the good part. Doing it again. Yay! My live coding was finished. Woo! Okay, so now that that is out of the way, the next thing that we're going to do is we've added a player controller, which is, it represents the player. So that makes sense in a networking multiplayer context. But now, what we're going to have to do is, I think it makes more sense to have all the, what is essentially the account logic in a separate component. So, you know what that means. creating a new thingamabob. An actor component. So let us click on this, and I'm gonna call it account manager component, which is going to be managing the EOS, or just like hypothetically any of the account stuff, but specifically we're thinking about EOS here. All right, so keep that in mind. So I'm going to hit create class, and then be at the same point. Yay! Dang diddly diamond. And there we go. The live coding has now succeeded on the account manager component. Yay! Alright, so that took my device a pretty long time because it is currently running quite slow for the sake of noise and volume and such. So now we have a player controller and we have an account manager component. I need to now make it so that the account manager component is actually added to the player controller. So that is what I am going to do. So with these recently created classes, you'll have Visual Studio already open, or you can double click on one of them and find it somewhere in your taskbar, I suppose. Okay, so here we are. We are now inside of the player controller, where in essence, all I'm really going to do is I'm going to try and add that account manager component. All right, so I'm going to create a protected section of this class, and it's going to have a U property, it's going to have a U property, and that U property is going to be a T object pointer, because I started using these one day and now I can't quit. We're probably just going to make it easier for self, yes. I'm just going to go over to the file, to the header file, and which is open for me because I just created it. And I'm going to copy it, and then at the top of the class, I'm going to forward declare. Maybe, you know what, actually, earlier I was saying that, like, maybe ideally you would know how to use the Visual Studio, but I shouldn't make assumptions like that or jump to those conclusions. So I am going to name mine account manager and make sure to default initialization it, and then put two semicolons, because yeah. So here I've got the account manager, and I'm going to call it component, and I am going to, is eating all my resources is what I don't understand. Okay, so yeah, what we're going to want to do is actually first, after we've gone and declared that, we're definitely going to need, I like to do this little thing where I go like public and I put the generated body in there. I know it doesn't do anything or whatever, but like, you know, it's something that I like to do. You know, so I'm going to do it, and just because I don't know what the computer's going to do at this state, I'm going to just go Control KO to switch over to this and go. There we go. And yeah, so create the constructor so that we can actually set up and initialize the component that we're looking to create and initialize. So hash include. In order to do that, we're going to need to get the account manager component.h. Awesome. And then we're going to go, and this is important, account manager component equals create default subobject, and then account manager component, and call it that account manager. Let's capitalize this. Component. Awesome. So now we've got this. I'm going to flip back over with Control KO. I'm going to make this I guess I was writing nothing. because it decided down the bottom there that it would be better spent writing into this, which you can't write into.
Loves to be fancy like that, I reckon.
So we're going to make that one visible, and then we're going to flip over here, and we've got this account manager, and we have created a default sub object. Yay! Account manager component, and we're going to go set is replicated true. Because I know that function exists, and if it doesn't exist, then I'm going to be really, really mad. Okay, cool. Yeah, okay. I just had to make sure. Anyways, so now we've got this in a very basic form. So now we've got the component on the player controller, and that is precisely what we want to see. Okay, so that stuff is set up. I'm going to go back to this player controller, and then I'm going, oh sorry, not player control, I'm going back to the editor, right? So I've opened up the editor because I really, really wanted to. So I'm going to create a folder called blueprints. Okay, and then we're going to open that, and then we're going to create a blueprint class based off of my project 6 game mode, and we're gonna go select, and then we're gonna go BP underscore my project 6 game mode. We're gonna go into that, and then we're gonna go into this. Because what we want to do is we want to change out the player controller for the one that we've just created. Yay! Alright, so I've created that, I've added that, and then compiling, and I'm saving. And, okay, so that's going to be the file for that. What I want is file, or I want edit, and I want project settings. And I need that. So, let's pop open this one. And we're going to go to maps and modes and set the default game mode to the one that I've just created. Whee! BP my project 6 game mode. Awesome. So now that will actually have the player controller that we've created. Now obviously we haven't compiled the C++ code, so if we run it now, it wouldn't have the component that we're looking for. Which is fine. We don't need to yet. Because there's nothing necessarily to test, because the account manager doesn't do anything. So let's get that running. Okay, dokay. This is where it gets juicy. So, what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to go to our account manager and yeah, we're definitely going to want to change some things. We're going to add some functionality, make it a little bit more interesting. And I'm going to move this up here because I want to. Okay, so this is the place where all the stuff is, or like most of the stuff is actually going to be happening. Now, there's a couple of things that we need to do set up in the project in general before we can actually get this thing going. So, one of the first things we're going to need to do is we're going to need to go back to the editor, and we're going to need to enable the online subsystem EOS. So, let's pop over back into the editor right here. And what we're going to do is go edit and click on plugins. Now, I already tried to search this up, so what we're going to want to do is at this search bar, we're going to go EOS. No, we're going to want to search up online subsystem EOS. And then we're going to get this. It says it's in beta, but we don't even, we don't mind about that. So what we're going to do is we're going to hit the tick box, and it's going to say it's in beta, and it's all like, yeah. But we're going to say yes and enable it, and what we're going to do is click a restart down the bottom here. That is going to restart the editor. Yay, look, it's restarting. And there we go. now that the editor has restarted, that should mean that we have the EOS in our list of active plugins. So if we look at that, go online, nope, online, Subsystem, EOS. Yay, it's enabled. That's good. So the next course of action to make sure that we can use some of the functions and such inside of EOS or the classes and stuff is we're going to go back to the Visual Studio project. I'm going to open that one up and we are going to expand my project and expand source and then expand my project 6 again. And we're going to be double clicking on the build.cs because we need to include the module. Got some pretty basic module includes here. So I don't know whether we need it, but I'm going to add it anyway. I'm going to add netcore. Don't know if we need it. Going to add it anyway. So netcore, which will just be core networking, I believe. And then we're going to want to add on up. Hey, come on, bro. We're going to need to add online subsystem and oh, nope, not that either. Online subsystem EOS. So, I think that is all we need. And it might be beneficial as well. So, I'm going to slap this onto a new line. And I'm going to also, just in case, because I don't know, include the EOS SDK.
Yay.
Because maybe we'll use it, maybe we won't. I do not remember exactly. I am adding a couple things. Might not be necessary. Who knows? So, there we go. I've added all the necessary stuff. So, what I think is going to be necessary now is to build the project. Well, I'm simply going to close down the Visual Studio. Eventually. And then close down the editor. And then I'm going to navigate to where I have my project stored on my device. And I am going to do like a clear out all the cache data. So that's .vs, binaries, derived data cache, intermediate, saved, .sln. And then I'm going to right click on the U project, show more options, and hit generate Visual Studio project files, or project files. Generate project files. Now this is going to take a little bit, but once it's done, it will have generated a new .sln that I will be able to open. Coolio, so that's created a .sln that I can now open up and wait for that to be ready. And then here we are, back into the project. So first things first, it's got UE5 as the startup project. I don't want that. So I'm going to right click on my project 6, on my project 6, on my project 6. There we go. And set it as the startup project. There we go. Cool. I'm going to then change this to development editor. Or I can just wait and watch and prepare for whatever you have to show my way. And
Oh, come on.
it changed. It's better. Yay. It went to development editor. Now I've just got to change this to Win64. No.
Come on, please. Don't do this.
Oh, it's Win64. Brilliant. Alright, now I'm going to go Control F5. So now I'm just waiting for this to build. And there we go. It is now compiled. And it's going to start opening the project now. Any second. Hey, there we go. Look at it go. Brilliant. And now that the project has finished loading up, we are back into it. waiting for it to load. Now it's preparing shaders. Now it's all loaded. Cool. So that has everything set up with the access, hopefully, to the EOS stuff that we're going to need to do the account manager component. So now that we're back in the Visual Studio project, I'm going to open the My Project, expand the source files, go into public, and then open the account management component. With this, the first thing that we're going to be doing is I am going to create a function that allows me to start the login process. Okay, so the first step is creating a login function that allows us to do all the login function calls inside the EOS Online subsystem. So let's get that started. I'm going to create a function under tick component, and I'm going to make it a U function. It's not necessary, but you can do it. And it is going to be called, quite simply, the void function called login. And I'm going to have a variable inside of it that is b create device ID, because obviously with this we're trying to make the device ID, and we will default it to true because on first login we're likely trying to create a device ID, because before we can do the actual login to the EOS stuff we need to have a device ID. So I'm going to right click it, go to quick factors, refactoring, all that good stuff. I'm going to create a definition. There we go. Awesome. So, the first course of action with this is we want to first get the subsystem that we are looking for. So, in order to do this, I think there are a couple includes we're going to need. I'm going to start including things and wait until I find the thing that I'm looking for. Because the first thing we're going to try and do is get the Online subsystem interface, I think. Online subsystem.h. And I'm going to also do #include online subsystem utils.h, and finally #include online subsystem types.h. Okay. So hopefully those red squiggly yep, they're gone. Awesome. They're back. Okay, we're still missing one thing from the build.cs that I missed. Because of course I did, and that is fantastic. So the last thing that we're missing that I forgot to include was online subsystem utils. Online subsystem utils, which is another module that we will need in order for this to work. Alright, sorry, I am back. So this online subsystem utils is absolutely necessary because the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to try and get the subsystem. And in order to do that, what we need to do is we need to write this line of code right here. online subsystem, and then a pointer with an actual pointer, and call it subsystem. And there's many ways that you can actually get an online subsystem, but in order for it to function as intended, you specifically have to do this one, right? So this is the best way to get the subsystem from what my research suggests. Somehow, like, there are other function calls, they get like 2 different subsystems somehow in some way. So this is the one that you actually want to be using. So you go online as the namespace, and then you call the function get subsystem. This is for getting online subsystems, I should say. And then you call get world. And yep, that is a function call that comes from the online subsystem utils. Now, the next thing that we got to do is we got to get the identity interface. For this one, I'm going to go online identity PTR. So now we name this pointer instead of actually making it a pointer. I don't know why, but this is what we do. And then we get that subsystem that we just got, and we call a function on that, get identity interface. There we go. So now we have the subsystem itself and the online identity pointer. So now we've got it. The next thing that we got to do once we have the subsystem and the identity is I want to get the unique player ID just to make sure that I have it and that there is one. So to get that, we're going to use so we're going to use a variable called funique net ID pointer, I think is what we're looking for here. And then we go net ID. So we want a pointer to the ID. That's weird. It uses a lowercase d. And I'm going to do that too, because that's what it does. And I'm nothing if not a follower. And so then we want to use the identity, and we'll go get unique player ID and go for 0. So now we have a subsystem, an identity, and a net ID. The net ID will be used as, I guess, like a reference to know whether the player has one. Actually, you know what? All this logic that we have here, I think is actually misplaced for what we want to accomplish. Because if we want to create a device ID, there's not really any point in getting the subsystem and identity here because we're not going to be able to use it for anything. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to check create device ID. So if we go to do the login and we find that we want to create the device ID, then we can put some logic here that kind of says, all right, I want to create a device ID. Now, how do I go about doing that? So we'll implement this later. We're going to have like a function that creates device IDs, but this is here so that we can know. This will be like kind of a, preventative operation that makes it so that we don't call the rest of the login function. Because what we're going to be doing is if we want to create a device ID, we'll create the device ID, and then once that's created, then we will call this login function again, but tell it not to create the device ID. So the next thing that we want to do down here is we want to check if the net ID is equal to, it's not equal to a null pointer, and that the identity, not how you spell it, get login status for 0 equals e login status logged in, because if we're already logged in, we do not want to try and call the login function again. So we're just going to return that. So we've written out this code, right? And the next thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to want to bind to the identity add on login complete delegate handle. So we're going to want to bind to this handle, but in order to do that, we actually have to have a delegate, a function that meets that signature. So we have to create those, and we also want to store the handle that comes from this function so that we can later unbind it. Yeah, so when this is done, we've put a delegate and we've binded it to it that we want to have the handle stored so that we can reset it later. So let's set up all of that goody. The first thing we're going to need is fdelegate handle. So we could probably do a pretty basic one. So inside the protected section, I'm going to make a variable, and I'm going to have it called fdelegate handle. It'll be on login completed handled. No, on login complete handle. Oh dear, it's all over the place. And then the next thing that we're probably going to be looking for here is a little function that goes void handle login completed. So this will be the function that gets called back when the login does a completes its thing that it's doing. So in the definition, we need first for this thing to stop taking over my mouse. Then we click back because we need to do that because it keeps taking over my mouse. We create an int32 for the local user num. So that's the local user. Bool whether it was a successful login. Yep. Then we need the const f unique net ID reference for the user ID, and then const f string reference error. So this is the signature that we need for this function, and so I'm going to create a definition for it. That's not exactly where I wanted it to be because it's not super relevant to its ordering. So there we go. So now we have a function and a handle. What I'm going to go do now is go back to the login function with Control KO. I'm going to go with the login complete. Here it is. And I'm going to set it to this. And I'm going to bind to this delegate by having 0 as the, I believe it's the username it says. And then we go with the creation of a delegate binding with the create U object. So f on login complete delegate create U object, and it will be this or the C, and then a reference. I'm going to use this class type def because I'm fancy like that, so I'm just going to do that. And then call handle login completed as the function that's bind to it. So now when we actually call the login function, it's going to call this callback. So now that we have this delegate that we've gone and subscribed to and kept the handle for, the next course of action we're going to be doing is because if you try to actually have the game released on something like Epic Games, then when the game goes and plays from the Epic Games launcher, there will be command line arguments. So those command line arguments you can read in from and then use them for doing like some of the login process. This might not necessarily be specifically needed for device ID. I could be wrong about that. I haven't used it for the device ID, but it's probably better to have it here because you should, so take that. So yeah, we're basically going to read in the command line arguments and take it in. If it has anything in there, then we'll use it. If it doesn't, then we'll use the default path, which is what we're majorly going to be doing, especially while you're testing and stuff. So let us do that. I'm going to create an F string called auth type. Okay, go back. And I am going to call this fancy little thing called fpass value and then f command line get and then go text, we're going to be looking for in the command line where it says auth_type. Nope, type. Now, I think this has to be very particular because it's looking for where in the command line it says those words. So then auth type. There we go. So we're basically trying to get if somebody has passed in as part of a command line argument the auth type and then, you know, auth type, then we want to use that, right? So our first check will be like, is the auth type empty? So has something actually been passed through? We need to check that it is not empty. We check if the auth type is not empty, and if it's not empty, something has been passed through, i.e. with either launched through something like Epic Games, or that we've passed it through as part of like project settings and testing and stuff like that. So we'll try to do an auto login. I like to, for this part, while you're like in engine and stuff like that, I'd like to do a little bit of a UE log. So log temp log, and then text, we are going to be logging into EOS. And then the next course of action, we're saying, hey, we're starting to log into EOS. We're going to call the identity auto login. So we try to do an auto login when the command line arguments already contains all the data that we need to do the login. So we don't have to get that data ourselves in any way. It's already been passed in. The login process has already started, I think. But we want to check if it failed. Because if it failed, then we immediately want to go ahead and get UE log, drag down, and paste this, and just say, we failed to log in on your slash. We then want to go and clear the handle because we don't need it anymore, because it's like, oh, we failed. We not got it. And so we want to pass in this stuff on completed handle delegate because we don't want to be listening and calling functions when we don't need to. So then we want to also reset the actual handle, which is on login completed delegate handle. So now that we've got the on login completed handle, we want to actually reset it because we don't want any of the data that it has to pass through. And that is it. I don't know why I hit enter 2 more times. So this is basically, all right, we found the auth type, have the data, we try to do the auto login. All right. Say we don't, right? Which is, you know, most of the case of what I've got. Then we need to create our own data. Now, in order to create our own data, we basically have to set up I've got a little variable that has some of the information, i.e. like the auth type that we're actually trying to use. So let us begin that. There is a type called F Online Account Credentials. I'm going to call it credentials. And to initialize it, I'm going to have, it's going to have like 3 little bits of data, right? So this will be the type, like the auth type up here, the in ID, something else, and then the in token, something else again. Don't know. But when we actually go to the auth type, what we want to do is we want to write in auth type, type, colon, device ID, access token. And in that line with a semicolon. So this will basically be telling it, all right, we didn't have the previous information to tell us what kind of login we're doing, so we're going to do device ID. Yar. And I'm going to be calling the logging into EOS once again, because that is what we're about to start trying to do, which we can do by going if not, because if it doesn't succeed, then we want to immediately cancel or remove all the delegate and the handles. We want to go login this time. So we want to go 0 and then the credentials that we actually just created. And we'll turn that into a bracket where basically I'm just going to go Control Z, Control V. Yeah. So, what we want to do now is this is our basic login function, right? There's nothing more that we really need to do because we're basically just using a login function that, well, we still have to implement this section. But other than that, the rest of it is basically the logic, excluding the device ID stuff. So, let us implement the handle login completed. We'll get back to this a little bit later. So, here's the handle login completed function. Alright, for the example of this tutorial, this function is actually extremely simple. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go Control C up here, Control V down here, Control C up here, and Control V down here. And that's it. Now, what you would ideally do is you would have some kind of logic set up that could give some indication to the player that the login has completed. So for my project that I've done like user interface where like menus will pop up, kind of say, hey, the login succeeded, congratulations. But for the sake of this, we're basically just going to clear out the delegate and the delegate handle and stuff like that. And so that's basically all that is. The next part. So we have this section up here where we need to create the device ID. So let us get to that. Okay, so to set this part of the code up, what we're going to do is we're going to flip over to here and we're going to create a function. And this is going to be crazy, I know, alright? You're not going to be able to believe it. But we're going to create a function called create device ID. Insane, I know. It's pretty cray. And it's not going to take any arguments because it's not necessarily going to need any, but it is going to be a bit of, how shall we say, it's got a bit going on, is probably the best way to put it. So for the creating of the device ID, this is very particular in the way that it needs to be set up, because this functionality is specific to the EOS subsystem. So this right here, it didn't care what the subsystem was. It didn't really matter because we just needed whatever we would get because we're just setting up the login stuff. But for this one, creating device ID is very specifically an EOS thing. So we're going to go ahead and rewrite the lines of code, subsystem, and pointer, and go subsystem. And we're going to call the same function online, but we're going to call the get subsystem function get world, and we're going to be using the second parameter, which is the subsystem name, which in this case is called EOS. And with that will actually go and try and find the subsystem with that name. And I'm going to then cast it. We're actually going to need to do an include. So for the next part, we're actually going to need to do an include at the top here. The include that we're going to need is hash include I online subsystem EOS. So we're going to include the interface header file. And we're going to go I online subsystem EOS. So we're just basically going to go EOS subsystem, and we are going to make it, we're going to cast it from subsystem to the I online subsystem EOS. First things first, obviously we've got to check if EOS subsystem is actually a null pointer, because that could very well be the case because maybe you don't have it enabled. So if it's not equal to a null pointer, then I am going to put down a UE log here to kind of say, hey, what a wonderful, it is EOS subsystem kind of day. So we know we've actually found it, and we'll have like a log that says, yay, we found it. And we next want to go get the platform handle for EOS. Platform handle pointer for EOS. So we grab this, and we go platform handle, which equals the EOS subsystem platform. Oh no. Get EOS platform handle. Perfect. And then we want to check if that is null pointer. Form handle. Null pointer. Okay. So now we have the platform handle. The next part we need is to get the connect handle. Of course. Oh no. Okay, so in order to get the connect handle, we need to have another include. I think this is the point that the EOS SDK becomes relevant. So, okay, so we're going to have to include the EOS underscore SDK.h. There we go. That should be everything we need. So now that we have that include, we can then get the connect handle and go connect handle as the name for our variable and go get the EOS underscore platform connect interface. And we'll use a dereference of the platform handle. And you might be wondering, why? Well, because. So, this isn't working because we're missing one more include. So let's go do that. So I'm going to try and include the EOS SDK manager. And then scroll down. Yay! There we go. Okay, so yeah, we needed that include to get the connect handle from that thing, from that data, because that is just how it works. Now, the next thing that is going to be necessary is we have to check whether the connect handle is actually set. So connect handle. So if that is valid, probably going to put another debug line to say that we actually got to this point. So let's go with got the connect handle to see how the process is chugging along. Okay, so there are many things that seem to define themselves as a device ID, I think. I could be wrong about that. Because there is a function in the UKismet system library, which if we go up to the top and decide, yay, I want to include that now. Why do I keep saying yay? I don't know. But if we go Kismet system library, Kismet system library, there we go. And we come all the way back. There's another way to get like what is essentially like the device ID thing, which is like more local to the actual like hardware, I believe, or like the software, the hardware of the. So basically, if you go fstring and call it device ID, and then go UKismet system library and go get device ID, and it has this function, which works on some things, doesn't work on other things. So in order to account for that, what I have been doing is going and setting it and changing it based on whether, you know, is it actually empty. So if it is empty, if it's not empty, just keep it how it is. Device ID, otherwise, just set it to something like my device. This is one of those opportunities where if you want to create a system that actually does something a bit more robust or unique or something like that, then, you know, you can feel free. That would have been really bad. Whatever that function does would have made things not good. So good thing we fixed that. Now, this is the first time that we're going to be going like, it's going to get a bit, it's going to get a bit crazy. This is the point that we start doing some EOS, like, stuffy wuffy wuff, right? Like, we've been doing some things like getting the platform handle, getting the connect interface or handle, all this kind of stuff with the logins. But now it's going to get, because watch this. This is some real stuff, you know? So then connect, and then underscore, and go create device ID options. Yay! So it's just really just like a type with a really long name is what I was basically getting at. And the data that we have to pass into it is very particular, because if we don't pass it in, then it won't be very happy. It won't do what we want it to do. So first things first, an API version, which we need to pass in, which we just call connect, EOS connect underscore create device ID API latest. Yep, it was meant to be all caps and I didn't have it like that. So create device ID, create device, create oh wait, create device options. Yeah. Dot device model, and this is when we call this little fancy little thing that they have in Unreal to ANSI. I don't remember why I do this. Like, I know that oh no, that's not. Yeah, no, that's no. I know why I do this. It's because this variable type wants a const char pointer, and this does that somehow. The next thing that we're going to do is we are going to create a delegate, but it's not going to be a delegate in the same way that the other delegate was. This is, I think, a special EOS delegate, or a... It's kind of like I have to define the function here inside the function, so that's what we're going to do. So, this is of type EOS underscore connect underscore create device ID callback on that's what I'm missing. On create device ID callback. No, that's not what I was asking for, and you know that, but you decided to do it anyway because, I don't know, you've got a problem with me. We need to discuss these things. We can't just let out all these anger in public. On create device ID callback. There we go. That's what we're looking for. And I'm going to call it the completion delegate. So when the creation of the device ID actually finishes, then what we want to do is have this function. It's gonna be a lambda function, is essentially what I was trying to say, in a very, very fun, funky, unique, interesting way. And it's gonna have some data passed into it. Create device ID callback info. There we go. Called data. Alrighty, ready. So the first things first, have a debug thing that says, hey, the login callback was called. Need a lot of debug stuff for this stuff, because if things go wrong, you can, you know, see where. And then if we go if data result code equals EOS underscore result, EOS result, because, you know, it's electronic, not what that means. It means enum. And I know this, but sometimes I just like the confusion. Success. If we had a success, then we can say that, hey, we had a success. And this, my friend, can be a warning. Yes. Warning, we are amazing. Which, of course, is exactly what that means. Semicolon. We want to put that at the end of the lambda so that it doesn't... Okay. EOS create device ID success. And then, in the else, we want to put together another thing that gives us more data. But this means that we failed, and we are sad about that. Grrr. So, EOS create device ID. But we want to put failed. So we equal, and it's going to be HS. Don't know what this format specifier is. I'm not sure what it is, or I haven't seen it before, but it is necessary because we're going to be converting the result to string. Yeah. And that would be the data result code. So that if something does go wrong, we'll know what it is. Sometimes when we're trying to create the device ID, we've already created it on that device and it just can't make a duplicate, which isn't necessarily a problem. Which is why what we want to do is have this part of the data, right? So we are going to try and get this account manager component that we're currently in. So we're going to pass through the account manager component when we call the function that will call this callback, and then that will make it so that we can then reread it back in the completion delegate. So this is where we get the cyclic, I can't remember what the term is when the function calls itself in a way, or function calls itself. It's kind of like that, but it goes to another function. So this function is called by login. So create device ID is called by login, and then create device ID will call login, but without calling this function again. So it's not an infinite loop. It stops eventually, but we have to try to create the device ID first to make sure that we have one to use one so that we can call the function. But we want to then go handler component and call it, and we're going to have to do a C style cast, I think that's called. I could be wrong about that. Oh, please don't attack me for that one. C style cast, and then go data, client data. So we'll be passing that through so that we can actually use it. And we'll go if handler comp is not equal to a null pointer, then we want to do a debug line that says, hey, we got the component, got handler component, and we then want to call login and go false this time, because, you know, we're in the create device ID. We tried to create the device ID. So it creates this kind of very comfortable circle that we can use. So, after we've created that little lambda function with the delegate, or define the delegate with the lambda function, we then want to call EOS underscore connect underscore create device ID. And this is the point that we use the connect handle that we got from earlier. Then we go and pass in the create device options that we created. We pass in this. This is where the client data is, as you can see, client data. And then the completion delegate. There we go. Very nice. Hey, it's me from the future here. Something I realized as I was editing this is back in the account manager component.cpp, we have this create device ID, never called the create device ID function. So that's what I'm going to add right now is create device ID, and that's gone and called create device ID, which is, totally sick. Then we want to hit return. No point in bothering trying to do the login if that's not going to work. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that is all of that. But the next part is entering into the source code. Okay, so here we are in the UE5 solution file. And what we're going to be looking for is we're going to be going into, I don't know why that's expanded. So the files that we're going to be changing and looking for is we go to the UE5 project, go down to plugins, expand that one. Then go into the section that says online. Then here, as you can see, there's some pretty clear stuff that we're looking that would be related to what we're looking for. Specifically, online subsystem EOS, and we want to expand source, and we want to expand online subsystem EOS, and then we want to go private, so that we can go down to the usermanager.h and usermanager.cpp. Now, this is UE5.5, so the code can get moved around a little bit. But if we scroll down to about line 1,200, we've gone way past 1,200, and yep, here we go, 1,270, right? Now, you can do some exploring as to where this function gets called from, but the important part is right here. So I've already done these changes because I've done it in my own project, but I'm going to go through what it was that I did, only because creating a separate copy of the UE5 source would take ages. So I'm just going to show what I've done and not try to redo it and then build it and all that kind of stuff. But you will have to in order to get it to work. But essentially, everything that we just did in our project to get this stuff working is blocked by essentially this section here, right? This section that says add user login info. By default, this is set to 0, and that means that when we get to this part of the code, none of this actually gets called, which is absolutely necessary for the connect login to function. So device ID with this thing set to 0 just doesn't work. Now, why they do it, they probably have their reason. I do know they've got here that it says get platform display name, which doesn't technically work by default for whatever reason, which you can tell because this is some code that I added here that I'll explain a little bit. But yeah, get display name doesn't necessarily work out the box for device ID, so maybe that's why it's functioning in that way. But essentially, this thing right here, which if we go to the definition, is actually defined inside of the definitions subsystem EOS stuff. So one option you can do, right? So this this by default is set to 0. One option is you can just define it as 1, right? And that is a good temporary thing, but if you build the engine again, I think it gets set back to 0. So on top of doing this, what you also want to do is you want to go to online subsystem EOS build online subsystem EOS.build.cs, and then you want to scroll down, and you'll see that this right here, B add user login info. It's normally set to false. I have set it to true, because then when it actually goes to build this thing, then it will look here, private definitions, it will look at whatever this, it will set this macro to whatever this value is equal to. And so by default it being false, and when it builds and generates, it will set it to 0. So if you set it to true, then when it builds, it will set it to 1, which we need for it to actually try and call this function. But, as I mentioned earlier, it doesn't actually work by default. At least on PC, it doesn't work by default, because what it will do is it will try and get the platform display name. And that platform display name for, say, like, you've got the null subsystem active, right? Because, you've got nothing else going on. It will create a name, but the name will be over 32 characters long, which is due to, like, it uses, like, a GUID, and, then it adds, like, suffixes to it of, like, number of, like, local user number or something like that. I can't remember exactly. There's a bunch of different stuff that it does. But it makes it over 32 characters, which is too long. EOS will be like, not valid. You cannot log in with the name that long. So what I've done is I've created this function, generate random display name. Now, you may create your own system for getting a display name. You can make a way that allows you to have the engine ask the game, or have the game send data back to the engine that it can use to have the display name, something particular, your own, like, system and things like that. But for me, what I've been doing is I created this generate random display name function that gets called if the display name from here is empty, which is another option. The display name could just be empty, which is also not valid for EOS connecting. So I go to this definition right here, and this is the function that I've created. I've got this generated name with nothing in it, and then I loop through the number, the length that I want the name to be, and I get a random character from the random character array that I have, and I append it to the generated name and just return that. So it's basically a name with random characters put together at a specified length. And to see what that random character array is, you're gonna love this. It's just an array with the entire alphabet and numbers. So, yeah, I just went to the header file and added this so that I could use it. It's basically capital letters, lowercase letters, numbers. It really just, not the prettiest of solutions, but, it functions. So, yeah. But if I go back here, with all that kind of set up, when you actually redefine to make sure that it actually adds the user login info and gives a display name that has characters below the number of 32, below 33, then the logging in functions with a device ID. You don't need to log into another service like PlayStation or Steam or Epic Games or something like that. So that is good. That should be all that is necessary. Yeah, so I set this display name. I made a variable and got it to take this, where before it was like this variable was directly set by this function call. So I just split it out as well so that I could make sure the display name has something valid in it. I don't know whether this is problematic. I haven't had the chance to, like, go ahead and, like, do some proper testing and stuff like I've been able to get it functioning on an Android device, and it can connect to one another, and it's all, like, that's all good and functional. But I don't know whether, like, if the display names accidentally generate to be the same as somebody else's playing the game, or even on EOS or something like that, then will it cause a problem? I don't know. But this is my current solution. But at the very least, the important part is making people aware that this is the blocking operation, this being set to 0, that makes it so that Vice ID doesn't work with the EOS Online Subsystem plugin. But you can get it to work, but you need to use a source build of the engine. So, the thing that we need to set up here inside the default engine.ini is we actually need to set up the online EOS subsystem. So, let us do that. The first thing that we're going to need to do is I'm going to drop these down some levels and create a new section, and it will be online subsystem EOS. And all we'll be doing is go be enabled equals true. Simple. Then, what we'll need to do is for the online, well, nope, we need square brackets, online subsystem. We will be setting the default platform service to equal EOS. And I also have gone native platform service equals EOS. Maybe necessarily purely because of like some of the function calls that EOS does. Then the next part, and this is definitely just going to be easier if I just copy some stuff, is I need to copy the game net driver. So if we pop this one, so in the script engine.game engine plus net driver definitions equals def name equals game net driver, comma driver class name equals online subsystem online subsystem EOS dot net driver EOS, comma driver class name fallback equals online subsystem utils dot IP net driver. So that will get the EOS net driver all set up. Then we're going to create another section, and it's going to be /script/socket subsystem EOS dot net driver EOS base. Now the reason I'm doing this is because I want to enable peer-to-peer is using P2P sockets equals true. Then I'm going to copy and I'm going to paste this section right here. I don't know if it's necessary. I can't remember at this point. So these are the necessary things that you need to do. First, you need to enable the online subsystem EOS. Then you need to set the default platform service to EOS. I don't know if the name platform, I don't know which one of these. I've just done both. Then you need to add the net driver definition, I think. I'm adding the peer-to-peer because that's how I want to do it. And then the compatible unique net ID types here, EOS. So this should be all the necessary stuff. Make sure that it's working in regards to the default engine.ini. Right, so I'm going to file and save that. And now move, and then, move back to the project. Okay, dokie. And so now, an important step is to make sure that once we have the plugin enabled, and we don't want to go back to that menu, is that we want to go to the project settings. We want to go down, and we want to click on in the plugins online subsystem EOS, and we want to go down here in the EOS login settings and use the new login flow. We want that setting enabled. And close that down. I'm going to return to the login function and make it blueprint callable, which, doesn't need to be the case. You don't need to do that, but I'm going to. I'm also going to go to the source of the public of this, and go for the player control. Okay. For the player controller, make this blueprint read only. And go save. Close down the editor again, and then build that. Okay, now that everything is properly set up and such, what we can do is, I'm just gonna, to make this kind of simple, I'm going to go into the level blueprint, open the level blueprint. Gonna wait for that to open. There it is. Go into here, go right click, begin play, and I'm going to get player, get player controller, get player controller. Here we go. We're on player index 0. This isn't the best way to go about it, but I'm just going to do this for now. And get component by class. By class, not by interface. Get component by class. Yep, there we go. And then go the account manager component. And go ahead and get and call login. And we will create the device ID. Okay, cool. So there's a pretty big chance that this doesn't work. And the reason is because you actually have to have like the Epic Online Services stuff functioning. So the developer portal, you set up an app or like product, whatever it's named, and that will make it work. So this doesn't have that set up, so there's a pretty good chance that this doesn't work. I'm going to hit play. Yeah. Okay. It is me from the future again. Ahaha, as I was editing this and reviewing the error that I had that you just saw, I realized that the error was not actually related to the login EOS failing because EOS didn't set up properly. It was because it couldn't find the component on the player controller it was looking for. And there's a very good reason for that. I had a quick look and I realized that if you go and you hit this drop down, you'll notice that the world override forces the My Project 6 game mode to be the one that is set for this level. But what we actually want is the not override to be happening. We want it set to the default, the project default. Actually, could we just... No, we can't. Okay. So yeah, it was overridden and we'll probably see a different error now. Yes, there we go. This is the error that we expected to find. Really related specifically to the EOS stuff. There was some relating to the EOS stuff, but it was actually that the game mode wasn't the one that we had set it to. So it wants the artifact settings, and that does not exist as of current. So you're going to need to have everything set up with the developer portal, but that's outside the scope of this video. I guess you're just going to have to trust me, bro, that it works, because it does. If there are any issues that people are having, then, you know, feel free to talk about them in the comments, because, yeah. But thank you for watching. If you did find it handy, then, you know what to do. Give it a little bit of a like. And subscribe, you know, that'd be really cool. I put my laptop onto silent mode for this video so that you wouldn't be able to hear the fan, and I really felt the pain of that because everything is extremely, extremely slow. So you know what? To play us out, here is my laptop.